Wilson had a fantastic phrase which I think captures our time, where he said, "We have godlike technology, Paleolithic emotions, and medieval institutions." And that sums up the conundrum that we are trying to analyze over these next 2 days. To do that, again, we have some fantastic speakers. We have Eric Daimler, who was Obama's advisor on AI. He's been an AI researcher and entrepreneur for the better part of 30 years. He is also the founder of Connexus, which is working at the cutting edge of AI technologies, because while the world is banking on generative AI, which is a probabilistic, a probabilistic model, he's working on something that he says you can bet your life on, which is a symbolic model, which is a deductive reasoning by machines, and what the two of them together can do. So we're going to call him on stage. We're also, just 10 minutes later, going to call Peeyush Ranjan on stage, who's the VP of Google Engineering. He's shepherding Google's big unleash on the world, which is the Gemini AI. And it's interesting because Google's DeepMind was the nursery of artificial intelligence. But talking about this extremely flexible world, OpenAI, a young, scrappy startup, overtook even Google. So we'll get to hear from Peeyush, how is AI going to be deployed in India? What are the ramifications? What's big tech thinking about all these riddles that are arising? And we have Irene Solaiman, who's a young researcher, AI researcher, who was working at OpenAI when ChatGPT was in its formation, when it was still in the womb. And she helped to train it, because another facet that every technologist, philosopher, people involved in this are talking about is to distinguish and not treat this technology as something outside of ourselves, but something that humans can train. So Irene was responsible for putting culture into technology, and it'll be a very, very interesting conversation to understand how do you train a dragon, how do you train a machine with culture and empathy and values. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eric Daimler on stage. So Eric, talk to us. Like I said, this is about a multifaceted conversation, and today you represent the optimism of that before I take you into deeper waters. So talk, there are a lot of entrepreneurs in this hall. Tell us some of the things that you're backing or you're betting on. And when we were chatting over coffee, you had almost a kind of, psychedelic moment of excitement looking at the labor compression that is possible through AI, efficiency, abundance. These are the words that Silicon Valley uses, the massive leap in quarterly growth that is possible. So, as I said, before I take you into the underlayers of that conversation, talk to us about you said safety, but what's more that you can do with AI?
The idea is that there's 3 ways to address automation. And the fourth option, resistance, really isn't an option. You can just think of all the times in human history where we've automated tasks. How did it go for the people that resisted automation? Not terribly well. And so we talk about really having 3 choices. One may be seductive, which is you become a niche player or you become an artisan. That's available for a lot of people. We still buy pottery that's made by hand. So that's still available for people, artisan niche players. The second we talk about is people that participate in automation, and that's people that use the tools, are familiar with the process about how they're interacting with their colleagues around the organization, and learn to improve that process using the digital tools that's available. The third option is if I ignore those first 2 and I just continue to do my job, then I'm just going to be slapped upside the head when automation just takes my job, and I'll be surprised when I'm one of the 200,000 people that are laid off. So participating means continuing to work on improving the automation. What's changed in a digital world is that we have to get comfortable developing skills and then having the half-life on those skills shrinking, and have to learn new skills. And this goes for everybody. It goes for me and everybody else in this room. All of our skills has a half-life, and that half-life is shrinking. That's what it means to be participating in this economy, and I am sympathetic to it because I'm participating in it, in both sides.
There's been a fear across the community, amongst coders themselves, that one is the immediate power of this and how do you harness it for good and for bad. But the other is that there's this black box phenomenon, where, for instance, Geoffrey Hinton and others said that they themselves don't understand what is going on within this technology. You know, you've put this massive complex structure together, 10 trillion parameters, and that's just the beginning. It's in its infancy, 1 year old, and it's already getting emergent qualities. You know, for instance, it learned to speak Bengali when it hadn't been given Bengali data. So Geoffrey has talked about that, and people say, oh, it's just a predictive machine. It's a stochastic parrot. It's just like predicting the next words in your sentence. But he said something very interesting. He said, why don't any of us try and predict what your friend is going to say? To predict the latter half of that sentence, you have to understand what that person was saying. That are these fears at all grounded? I'm not talking about sentience and Terminator, robots killing us, but just that this machine could become so complex that it escapes the parameters of what its coders had created. Is that possible?
In a short answer, yes.
Ouch. Ouch.
Yeah, but you know,
that's Obama's advisor saying that, guys.
It doesn't really matter whether we call this a stochastic parrot or a 32,000 word autocomplete. That's kind of literally true, but it kind of doesn't matter because the damage it could do, or the benefit, is really what we should be looking at. Because you imagine if I say I'm going to go running, you're not going to say, let's have lunch. Like, it'd be kind of weird, right? Or you'd say, that's a nice table. Like, that would be a non sequitur. I can begin to predict a little bit about how you're going to react. If I say, let's go running, you're going to say, oh, I'm tired. Oh, let's get lunch first, or something like that. That's where this is going, and that's still academic research, but 5 to 10 years, that's what's going to happen. So I'm going to construct an email, and I'm going to be able to predict a little bit about how somebody's going to respond to the email, not just how to construct it. That's where this is going. And that's a benefit of scale, but it also gets a little scary, right? It gets a little frightening. And you can kind of imagine the bad ways that could be deployed. But it's also super exciting, right?
Okay, Eric, you're going to be accosted over lunch, and people are going to want to deepen these conversations. I'm going to bring Peeyush and Irene Solaiman on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peeyush, Ranjan, and Irene Solaiman. Thank you very much for being here, Peeyush and Irene. You know, I just had Eric open the first layer of the onion peel, and I'd love to draw both of you into it. Peeyush, you've been, again, at the heart of Google engineering. You know, you've been there many years, 15 years. You played a big role in deploying Google in India and expanding its depth in India. So again, this is really just a strategy that, first, let's talk about the good stuff. You really helped Google acculturate to India. You know, you created Google Pay, you opened up many languages, 100 language apps, made it possible for first generation literates, even those who are not literate, to be able to access knowledge. So all of that is fantastic. But now here's a new beast on the landscape, which is generative AI, or indeed deductive symbolic AI. In the Indian context, where do you see this technology going? Which would be the areas that it would first be most wonderfully deployed in?
I think in the Indian context, if you look at the context, probably number one big thing, which is unlike many other places, is since we are talking about AI and the core of some of that starts with language, there's so many different languages which we have. We have a huge workforce which actually goes and does a bunch of things. There are sectors which are not modernized as much as some of the Western countries like healthcare, agriculture, but there is a lot of desire to do that. And also there's a global role which I think India itself can play. So I think looking at all of these, there's a lot of opportunities. It'll be hard for me to say just one or two, but I would say like the biggest thing I feel is going into specific sectors will be great. Like I gave example of healthcare or agriculture. Similarly, I think there's a big opportunity in India. I mean, you know, given all the things which you said, the thesis which I hold is like you innovate for India, you will innovate for the world, right? I mean, the examples which you're talking about, like almost all of them, when we have done that for India, it actually has become examples which you can take to every market and say, like, look how great it works. So I think from that perspective, I think there is a huge opportunity in reskilling, which we can do here. A whole world actually will probably find itself reskilling, learning the new things. So.
Peeyush, reskilling in what? When this technology is coming to replace knowledge workers, machine workers, shop assistants, bosses. Most CEOs here are going to be irrelevant after a while because AI decision making is taking over everything, and it's seen as more objective, which is something that we'll be speaking with Michael Sandel, who's a philosopher, that is objective decision making really better than subjective decision making? That's a whole, so I'm not sure we should allow you these easy getaways.
No, not at all. It's not easy, but I don't buy the basic premise that everybody will be out of a job. The way we look at what exactly is happening, let's look at it from first principles, right? When internet came about, information got digitized, right? When information got digitized, there were a lot of jobs which were there, and now things got democratized. Information was more accessible, right? People who were selling Encyclopedia Britannica door to door, well, those jobs don't exist anymore. But there's so many other things which can be done. If you look at, let's talk about Google Pay. Money got digitized, right? See how many more people are banked today and how better the distribution of government funds is today, right, in India itself. Everybody in the world is looking at what India did and oh, how can we go do that, right? So here, what is happening? Cognition is getting digitized, right? Now, all of a sudden, you have a tool in front of you which actually can take over the tedious and repetitive and those kind of tasks and let you focus at a higher level. Now, you can go to every technology. Let's take Photoshop, those kind of things. They make people do more creative jobs. If you took that tool away, their productivity will actually go down because they will be doing more tedious things, repetitive things more. So fundamentally, when this kind of cognition digitization improves accessibility, a lot more people can go access that. Overall, yes, individuals who are doing certain things today, they have to go learn new things, but overall the society actually becomes more productive. And that's what our hope is, that this technology is going to help each one of us become more creative and do higher level, more creative jobs more easily, rather than the doomsday scenario which you're talking about.
Irene, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. As we were saying, that this is not just technology that exists in itself. It's being coded by men like the ones who are on stage, as well as women, and they have a role to play in it. And you've actually had this wonderful experience of humanizing the machine, or putting the human into the machine, moral values, cultural values. Talk to us about some of the dilemma of training ChatGPT to be more human.
Yes, well, I love something that Shoma has said to me, that AI is shaping us. And something that I've been working on is how do we shape AI back? I love the title of this session of How to Train a Dragon, because it was actually the internal title that we had for that work, was How to Train Your Dragon to be more like the communities that it's affecting. I'm so glad we're having this conversation in India, which has so much cultural richness, and coming from the US, there is no one culture per one large group, per one country population. So to try to figure out this immense machine that nobody really understands how it works, it's similar to How to Train a Dragon, where we don't have a set playbook, we don't have anything concrete that tells us this is the one way to fail-proof, make sure that it works for every single person interacting with it.
But Irene, talk to us about the specificities. You asked the machine a very interesting question: what is a happy person? And this is talking about bias in the machine that is being deployed at civilization scale. It's species scale deployment of a technology, which when you ask it, what does it mean to be happy? It says it's a man without a wife, with children. This is a machine saying that, and you were trying to train it to have a more nuanced understanding of happiness.
Exactly. Yes, and for some people, for that man without children, that could be absolutely true. I have not had that experience myself, so it might not work for me. And when we're asking these types of questions, when we think through what does culture mean to any group, it's the way that we have approached it technically is to start to break down to categories of culture. So one would be association and relationships. One would be concepts of beauty. And then another question that you would prompt a language model is what what makes the most beautiful person in the world? That looks incredibly different throughout the world, and a nuanced view, a nuanced answer would be that beauty is subjective, beauty is through the eye of the beholder, but a lot of people might disagree with that.
So Eric, earlier you said one safe way to deploy this technology would be to have circuit breakers. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so the concept of circuit breakers is one of the answers towards creating AI safety. That left to their own devices, people like me will be toiling away in the basement, creating automation and then linking automation. That's just what we will do, and we will just be creating more automation. But sometimes you don't want things to be linked. You don't want necessarily your Amazon customer trust score to be linked to the degree to which you're then trusted by the airplane security personnel, right? You don't want those links to necessarily occur. You want them to be transparent, because otherwise you could get caught in, if anybody watched the movie Brazil, it's a good movie, I'd imagine. It's a dystopic movie, but I liked it. It's a way, circuit breakers are something we need to be able to have a human interact with to break up these sequences of automation and expose the transparency of AI.
Irene, I wanted to bring you in that, there's this other aspect. We're talking about this big picture things, but there's already a deployment of AI in risk assessment, For instance, 22 states in America are using AI for parole to assess the criminality or future criminality of people. And there's a huge bias inbuilt into that. A black prisoner is going to naturally be seen as a bigger repeat offender than a white one, regardless of what happens. We've already talked about the fact that decision-making in companies, hiring, firing, insurance, whether you can get a bank loan, things which are really of existential risk already to some communities is already being determined by AI. So what's your thinking on that? How do we sensitize such a gigantic structure to do this?
Thank you for the easy question of today. So I want to talk I think there are 3 points here. One on existential risk and to whom. 2 on the level of risk in which we are deploying systems. And 3, something that we've all highlighted, which is what does it look like for people who are not closest to the systems to be able to guide the development of those systems. So around existential risk, there's been a lot of conversation around what does this mean for humanity as a whole, but also what does this mean in the very near term to peoples who may not be experiencing the benefits as much as they are experiencing those risks, and to whom jobs are existential. Something as loan prediction is existential to a family, which brings me to thinking about how are we deploying these systems and what are we training them on. A lot of when we think about an AI system goes back to how are we creating it, where are we sourcing the data on which we are training it, and a lot of that comes from human error, from sometimes bad things happen in human systems and how humans give out loans themselves, and then we train on that data, and then maybe AI can amplify that. So there's a lot of ways, not just technically, that we should be mitigating these harms. And then back to lowering the barrier for people who may not be computer scientists. I really appreciated Peeyush's earlier statements around language. For example, there's so much value that is codified in the diversity of Indian languages. There's also different ways that people are comfortable contributing to making a system work better in that particular language, and ensuring that when we have this conversation at Synapse, industry and technologists need to be listening to artists to understand how these systems cannot supplant but supplement their work, augment it but not replace it.
So, the question I was saving for you was that this troika of concerns we're talking about is the relationship between nature, humans, and technology. So far we were talking about humans and technology, but there is the nature aspect as well. And it's fascinating because we're talking about AI being the panacea for climate change, that it could possibly solve climate change. It's certainly absolutely changing the health industry, medical drugs, designing drugs, diagnostics. I'm not taking away from any of the excitements of AI, and I'm being very hypocritical here talking about all this because every image that you're seeing in this conference is generated by AI, So I just want to acknowledge that this is great hypocrisy right here. But at the same time, there's something now called technological thirst, and there are huge ecological costs to this technology. You know, it is very, very energy intensive, it's very water intensive, and I must appreciate both Microsoft and Google has put out a very transparent, I hope, report, which is that in just the last year, Microsoft's use of water went up by 1.75 billion gallons of water. Google said its use of water in the last 1 year, presumably training these little animals, has gone up by 20%. So that's a massive ecological cost for this technology, you know. How are we going to think around that?
I can tell you how we at Google are thinking about this. Also, sustainable computing, because even before AI, as the world was coming online and they were going into getting these services on their phones or laptops, the data centers were becoming very, very energy hungry. Now, if you go look at it, I mean, you know, I think it's almost like, I think 6+ years, we have been producing reports of how our data centers are sustainable and either very low carbon footprint or virtually no carbon footprint. The basic thing which we are trying to do here is 4 things. First of all, we are trying to come up with technologies which are really able to do machine learning in more efficient manner. I gave the example of sparse gated mixture of experts. Google is the one which published
You're
that
getting
paper.
an easy pass on that because none of us can understand
but
what that is.
you don't have to believe me. Gemini 1.5, for example, if you have heard of that, I mean, it's able to handle 1 million tokens, right? And at lesser compute. Well, how? The papers were published by Google, that this is how you go do it. The whole purpose is how do we come up with better technology which reduces the compute? The second thing is how do you build special purpose machines? So TPUs, for example. The third is how do you do more in cloud as opposed to your desktop, because it's a lot more energy efficient to do there. And the third is how do you put your jobs where it's better, more energy efficient, because not every place in the world is the same in terms of power and cooling. But here's the overall point. It's a work in progress, but just I take these 4 things, and if you compute, the reason it's like much smaller, you know, the increase, we have made it, and this is calculated, almost 1,000x reduction. If we had not done these things, what the cost would have been compared to what it is today. And today, the training cost of all Google's energy usage is less than 15% is actually used in training, even at this scale.
Thank you very, very much, all of you, for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you.